Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm sure we'll have a few more folks join us, and I'm so happy Facebook Live we got that working. So this is an event hosted by Catalyst Miami, where we're asking the basic question: what happened in Tallahassee? I think this year more than any other, I have a huge question mark as to what happened last legislative session, what is happening with coronavirus, what is happening with our unemployment, and what are we going to do going forward? I think it's probably the most question marks I feel like I've definitely ever had. I'm sure many across the state feel the same way. Every year, Catalyst Miami goes to Tallahassee on our advocacy days, which are called Catalyst to the Capitol. And so this is a long-awaited debrief that we've promised the participants that went with us last year, and those that have gone with us for several years, about getting feedback on what we had advocated for, and seeing back in April, and seeing what had come of that. Wonderful. So our agenda, I'm just realizing there's a third P, but I'll ignore that. I was playing around with the Canva before. So today we'll go through a bill review from 2020. We're very lucky to have Senator Pizzo and Representative Joseph on to talk about what to expect for 2021, and take any questions that you all may have. And then we'll go over the trip for 2021 as well, and what we have planned for participation. So like I mentioned, we're so lucky to have Ida Eskamani, Senator Pizzo, and Representative Dotie Joseph. I was wondering if each of you could just briefly introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump into the agenda, but I think it's nice for people to hear from you. Just a brief introduction on yourself. So I'll start with Ida.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Catalyst Miami, for having me. Such an honor to be here with Senator Pizzo and Representative Joseph. Unfortunately, my colleague Charo cannot make it, so I have very big shoes to fill. But my name is Ida V. Eskamani. I'm public policy director for several progressive organizations here in Florida, including Florida Immigrant Coalition and New Florida Majority. So I am your liaison in the state capitol. So my main job is to connect community with public policy, and it's good to be here.
Great. Senator Pizzo?
I am filling in for Eddie Munster, the middle image that you have there in between Ida Eskamani and Dotie Joseph. So
I changed on the flyer.
Eddie Munster couldn't make it, so I'm filling in. But he only has a size 7 shoe, so I'm filling it adequately. Yeah, so I am the proud servant of 15 cities in Miami-Dade County, all the cool ones. Whenever Canadians are cold and wishing that they were in some nice place to be, it's in our district, which overlaps with Representative Dotie Joseph's district as well. And I'm a tourist. I enjoy long walks on the beach when they're open, and but I'm principally concerned with justice, with criminal justice reform, with environmental issues and housing, and obviously this pandemic has brought a lot of those issues to the forefront. And thankfully and hopefully we won't have short-term memories going into next session, and we'll have a thirst and an appetite for nonpartisan things that we should be able to get done for a sense of just human decency and part of the social contract. And Ida was explaining how she chairs, heads, or works or directs a number of organizations. Really what does that mean when you hear about that? It seems kind of abstract. Well, at like 11:15 p.m. at night on the last day of session, when there seems like no criminal justice bill for the entire session is going to pass, Ida could be seen walking with me as we're mean mugging House members to put our version on and then go back to the Senate and then be the last bill that passes, which we're very proud of 2 years in a row. Anecdotally, this past session, we were able to pass a bill that prevents the shackling of pregnant inmates, and also to prohibit solitary confinement for those, and which follows off of last year, where our bill was able to provide basic feminine hygiene products to female inmates. So when I go and visit a number of prisons like I do, I'm like, hi, and they're like, oh, this is the senator, and they're like, and like mean mugging me. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm the tampon guy. So I'm very popular in female facilities, but again, it goes back to the justice and social contract. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Senator Pizzo. And Representative Joseph?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dotie Joseph. So my first name is a little tricky because it only has one T. The real way to pronounce it is Dotie. The pre-approved alternative for Anglophones is Dottie, like Lottie Dottie, because I do like to party, but sometimes I cause trouble, as they will tell you in the Florida legislature. So I have the honor of serving Florida House District 108, which includes Miami Shores, El Portal, Biscayne Park, parts of the city of Miami, parts of North Miami, and whole swaths of unincorporated Dade, which is almost entirely in Senator Pizzo's district, his Senate district. Some of the things that I focus on is just equality in general. So whether it's, trying to get us to pass or ratify the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, and tomorrow is Women's Equality Day, by the way, just as a side note, and making sure that we get equal pay for equal work, or dealing with victims of domestic violence. So that's one swath. The other swath is having to do with making sure that the community has access to resources that it needs in the context of coronavirus, whether that's access to masks or testing, that sort of stuff. And then in the aftermath and ongoing math, I should say, of the Black Lives Matter movement, trying to see what we can do to get some real reform around the energy of the protests that we're working on. So I've been working with a whole bunch of groups to get some ideas to the table, including law enforcement. So I'm very hopeful about some of the things that we see coming down the pike.
Thank you all. We're so lucky to have so many champions here with us, not only for today, but as partners in Tallahassee and here locally. So thank you so much for taking the time this evening. So I'll jump right into it. Let me see. All right, perfect. So just for those of you that were on our Catalyst to the Capitol trip last year, here is our update on how we did. And thankfully, Ida will go into more depth on these specific bills, but I'm here to give the overview. So we advocated for 10 bills around affordable housing, some of which were things we were trying to oppose, some of which are things we were trying to forward. And so out of those, 5 had positive outcomes. So 5 things basically wanted to happened, or 5 things that we didn't want to happen, we were successfully blocked, and 5 had no results. So I think we did pretty well there for affordable housing. For healthcare access, we advocated for 6 bills, primarily around Medicaid expansion. 1 had a positive outcome, and 5 had no results. And let me rewind: Medicaid expansion, but also just the preservation of Medicaid, preservation of different programs, and not making things more difficult for people to access healthcare. Great. And then for climate action, we advocated for 3 bills. 1 had a positive outcome, 2 had no results. And for living wages, we advocated for 1 bill, which was to kind of change the calculation for minimum wage in Florida. And that bill had no result for this session. Of course, we know sometimes it takes several years for bills to see a vote as they go through the process. But I'll pass it to Ida to kind of talk more about the specifics. I'm happy to jump in anywhere, but we'll start with housing, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Thank you, Zalam, and thank you, everybody. I love the title of this forum, What Happened in Tallahassee. It's the question I ask myself in my nightmares. So it really resonated with me personally. And I just have to say how fortunate we are to have Senator Pizzo, Representative Joseph in the legislature, for the Miami-Dade community in this delegation. So we're just very grateful. And my internet was somewhat unstable, so hopefully she pulls through. But it's good to be here. Charo and I both, we anchor a lot in the legislature, really around this concept of what we call collaborative governance. And this idea of bringing people and community into the legislative process, electing folks from the community to represent us, folks who have a stake in our success, folks who will take community ideas, the ideas of directly impacted people, and turn them into legislation and champion that legislation. Both Senator Pizzo and Rep. Joseph have demonstrated that and have passed bills that come from community, and we're so grateful. And Senator Pizzo, of course, mentioned the work around dignity for incarcerated women, and that he's been so amazing as a partner in this work. Again, centering the voices of folks directly impacted. So much of what Catalyst Amy does is, of course, right, connected in that work. And so much of this is around, building diverse coalitions, mobilizing people to the your Catalyst Day was, maybe one day, in the 60-day session, but collectively, when we coordinate all of our efforts, we've made sure that community has a constant impact in the process. A huge shout out to Charo, my colleague, because she's really anchored just the calendar of all the different days in the Capitol and making sure we have a constant presence, which not only allows us to center our work, also better prepare for rapid response, because as we know, we often get a day, if any, notice of when some of these bills we're trying to defeat are heard. And so by working collectively and really embracing our intersectional struggle, we've been able to mobilize quickly and have a constant presence in the Capitol to community, and also pass some really good things. And I love, Catalyst priorities, and so excited to provide some insight. And Zalam, please don't hesitate to jump in. And of course, Senator Pizzo and Joseph, y'all as well. But here's the quick and dirty. I was given 20 minutes with Charo. I made it quicker only because I'm a fast talker, but I'm trying to slow down. But it's great to be here. And so let's talk affordable housing. So it is no question to the folks watching this and to the advocates here that we have a major affordable housing crisis in Florida. Before COVID, pre-COVID, this massive crisis that has only been exacerbated right now due to mass unemployment, a system that doesn't support safety nets in this state, so that when folks are getting paycheck to paycheck, you're already at such risk of losing your home. And of course, with COVID, we've seen that across the state. And so when we look at our priorities, though, this session, collectively, we were actually quite successful this legislative session. We were successful in keeping bad things from happening and actually passing some proactive legislation that centers the needs of renters, of manufactured homeowners, of some of our most, vulnerable communities, and folks that, of course, we agree housing is a fundamental right. And going through just some of the bills and some of the terminology is important too. So when something is laid on the table in the legislature, what that means is essentially one version of the bill was sort of laid on the just because they're going to pass another version of it. I think everyone probably knows this in your training up to the Capitol, where in the Florida legislature, you need a House bill and a Senate bill typically, and both need to go past the legislative process in their respective chambers. And then if they're the same version, they both pass and then they get signed into law. But what typically happens is they'll adopt the Senate version or the House version. So when they adopt the Senate version, they say they lay the House version on the table. And what that means is the House is adopting the Senate version. So laid on the table doesn't necessarily mean the bill is defeated or anything like that. It means that one version of it is sort of put away, but another one could still be moving. So with all that being said, when we look at the bad bills that would encourage destruction of existing affordable housing, which I love that phrasing, right to the point. So, Senate Bill 99 and House Bill 1339, and alongside Senate Bill 818. So Senate Bill 818 was that Senator Pizzo actually was amazing in committee on and championed, because this bill remove a lot of the fundamental rights of manufactured homeowners, or for some folks you may say mobile homeowners, right? But essentially what this bill did was reduce a lot of those basic rights and almost align them with some of the unfair tenant laws that we have actually. And because of some champions, particularly in the Senate, because that bill was not heard in the House, we were able to stop that bill from passage. But they did take some of that language in that bill and they put it in this housing bill. So that's what happens a lot in the session. you sort of defeat one thing, but then it appears somewhere else, right? And then again, collectively, we were able to remove the most harmful language from this big housing bill that ultimately did pass, and that's House Bill 1339, which, you know, was not everything we wanted, but had a few good things in it. And huge kudos to, you know, to community for coming out. We had our housing.
Uh-oh.
I think we're having a little connection issues with Ida.
Yeah, Ida froze the
I'm gonna-
internet.
I'll pick it up. I'll pick it up real
great.
quick
Let
until
me
she.
jump in real quick, Senator Pizzo, because I'm going to have to hop onto another meeting in like 5 minutes. So I'll just mention one thing about affordable housing that's not on this, so you can get into more details. Is for the first time, and I think over 10 years, we were able to fully fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So that's not going to show up as a specific bill, and that's a big deal. So Democrats and Republicans, we got our act together and fully funded that. That was one of, you know, a lot of our top priorities heading into the session. Now, on the back end, y'all's governor went and vetoed some of that money and then backfilled it with some money from the CARES Act, which is a little bit more limited in scope. But I just wanted to point that out before I hopped out. I didn't know, Zalan, is there anything you wanted me to cover real quick before I get off in the next like 5 minutes or so?
I guess what I'll ask. Yes. Okay. Perfect. I'm texting Ida to do, work on that as well. What I'll ask, if you have any words of advice or wisdom or things you really want the attendees of this this meeting to know about Tallahassee, I'd love if you could share that, because I think that was the big thing I wanted you to share. So before you hop off, that would be great.
All right. So in terms of advocacy, so I've helped people for now almost, I'm sad to admit, decades to advocate both on Capitol Hill in DC and in other forum. So in Tallahassee, the interesting thing about there is anything can happen, but you have to be realistic about what your expectations are and where things fit. So let's just take, for example, criminal justice reform. There are a whole host of ideas that are coming out as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement, and we've basically put them into 3 categories. And those categories are things that are easy, like they're low-hanging fruit. Republicans won't have a problem with it. We can get law enforcement buy-in. We have things on the other end of the spectrum, things that are hard, almost impossible. Republicans are probably not going to give them a hearing, and it's probably going to die, but they're statement bills and they're messaging bills, and they're still important to be filed. And had Democrats been in power, they would actually move, right? So we have to understand that the lay of the land where we operate in Tallahassee right now is Republican dominated. They have control of the House, the Senate, the governor's mansion. And if you live in Miami-Dade or the city of Miami, they also have our city mayor and our county mayor. So and both US senators. So just know that we're hardcore Republican dominated. So whatever we do, it has to work within those confines. And then there's the third category, which is these bills that are not a clear yes and not a clear no. They're going to take working on them to get them through, but they are attainable, right? But they're going to take some heavy lifting. So as you're advocating, you have to know kind of who you're dealing with and where whatever you're trying to advocate for falls on their priorities. Some of the stuff they'll listen to you, but they know they're not going to do anything with them. So just kind of know that and try to find the things that are easier to find common ground. It doesn't mean you don't fight for the messaging bills. You do, but just have an understanding of what's actually going to move and likely going to pass versus those that don't. Now, all of that being said, if there's something you're really passionate about, even if it's a deemed, not going to move bill, that doesn't mean you can't fight for it. Things happen all the time that people did not think were going to move, but yet they happen. Whether you're talking about the ERA, the 14th Amendment, like a whole host of things happen if people just put enough energy and mobilization behind them. So be encouraged is my point, but also kind of be mindful practically about what falls where. And I'm sure Senator Pizzo can kind of talk about some of his experiences with that and the particular bill. So I leave you all in great hands while I hop on another hearing. So thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Joseph. We're so lucky to have you for the next couple of years, or as well too. I'm so grateful for that outcome. So thank you so much. Great. Bye. Wonderful. Ida, were you able to make it back?
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
For now? Excellent. I knew I would leave y'all in very good hands with Rep. Joseph and Senator Pizzo and Zelalem, but I apologize for that, folks. I echo everything. And I have to say, Rep. Joseph and Senator Pizzo are both amazing Democrats that have found, pieces of legislation that really do help people that they've been able to pass. Which is a pretty big deal in the legislative process. So we're very grateful. And as well as, championing the issues that we demand champions for, right? And so to wrap up some of the affordable housing piece, the Florida Housing Justice Alliance, which Catalyst Miami is a part of, is a intersectional coalition of directly impacted people, of tenants, of manufactured homeowners, of homeowners, coming together to demand a people-centered housing campaign in Florida. We have some amazing housing champions in Florida. The Sadowski Affordable Trust Fund Coalition is this really powerful, organization of some of the biggest players in the state. It includes the Florida Chamber of Commerce, the Florida Realtors, various homelessness advocates, amazing partners in this effort. But even then, every single year, the legislature would steal money out of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and use it to pay for other things, right? We have different trust funds in our state budget, dollars that are designed to go towards specific things. But every year they would take money from affordable housing and give it to something else, right? This was the first year that they did not sweep the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. They left the $370 million 100% funded. Beginning of the legislative session, we were told by the House Budget Chair that was not possible, that they would need to sweep those funds. And so I think it's no coincidence that the first session where 100 directly impacted folks come to the Capitol demanding housing justice, where we put forth the first ever robust renters Bill of Rights package, where we had champions like Senator Pizzo, Rep. Eskamani, Senator Torres, Rep. Smith, putting forth bills from community to demand some of the most basic protections, like an automatic moratorium on evictions during hurricanes, for example, that Senator Pizzo filed. It was this moment where we really had this organized, people-centered housing effort that we were able to not only stop just about every bad housing bill that was put forth, but also stop the sweeping of the trust fund. We had good bills that we proactively passed, noted here. Senator Rodriguez has a bill around essentially adopting stronger protections around tenants when it comes to currently this federal law is stronger than state law, but at the courts there was no consensus on which to adopt, and so it was very arbitrary. So now we are requiring these federal protections, which are still not good enough overall, but better. And then we also stopped the Airbnb bill, which is really a legislation. It's a preemption bill that very much is written by and for Airbnb, which is not to say that's inherently bad, but you gotta. Typically, when a bill is written just to make profit, it's likely going to cause harm, right? And so, so that bill was unable to pass as well. The sad thing is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, though a huge legislative victory to get that 100% funded, the governor did veto $225 million from that, but legislatively, a huge victory for us, and no small part to mobilizations and coalitions and people impacted coming to the Capitol and sharing their stories. So just a big shout out to Catalyst for being a part of this effort, right? And we are not stopping, as we know. We're looking at more proactive bills next session. We had a really awesome legislative kind of set of priorities around housing, and everything came from people impacted. It came from stories in communities of folks suffering in this sort of unjust system we have that really puts landlords' rights over tenants. It's not an equal playing field. And then of course, just a situation where we don't have enough housing supply. We don't have enough affordable housing, right? And so really grateful to all the amazing efforts there. And if folks have questions, I don't know if maybe we'll take them later as well, but happy to answer that. And Zelalem and Senator Pizzo, if you have anything to add, please feel free on the housing front. Senator Pizzo is brilliant on this stuff as well. But huge kudos to community for coming and really building the first ever tenant-centered effort and also unifying with manufactured homeowners on this. The legislature has never seen this before. The one last quick thing I'll say is, in my previous job, I was legislative aide for a state house lawmaker, Representative Smith. And so when we collectively were looking at writing a renter's bill of rights, usually there's previous bills that you can refer back to. You know, a lot of these ideas, as you alluded to, Zalalem, are ideas that we've been fighting for years, right? And it usually takes like 3 to 5 years to get a much less pass a bill. Sometimes it feels like. But when we went back to do some research on trying to build like a tenant's bill of rights package, there was nothing to refer to. There was no bill. And we talked to folks who have been in the housing fight for a while, and they didn't have any bills to reference to either. So just a huge moment for us, right, as we build collective power and really center tenants and manufactured homeowners in the housing fight in Florida. We are making history together, and I'm certainly very proud to do it with y'all.
Great, thank you so much. I'm gonna switch to healthcare. I know we have 4 topics.
That's okay.
That was awesome.
Do you mind? I didn't get a word in about housing.
I'm sorry. Here you go.
Okay. So like the week I graduated high school, my family won a Supreme Court case, Pizzo versus Randolph Township in New Jersey, where they wanted to build something that was reasonable and the town said no and rezoned it. And it really pissed us off, and we felt that it was unjust and sort of directed toward us. So my dad took it all the way, and that was sort of my first foray. And New Jersey has what's called Mount Laurel Supreme Court decision based on affordable housing, where a number of nice bucolic towns would sell their obligations, would collect the fee, and then sell their obligations for affordable housing to other cities like Newark, Camden, and Trenton, and backlog those cities and exacerbate poverty. One of the things that bothers me and why I'm a little bit more flexible when it comes to certain considerations is I'm not a huge fan of building affordable housing, which in some cases, if it's severely affordable or completely subsidized, I'm not a big fan of always building housing for the poor in a poor neighborhood. The model just doesn't work. And that's where I really like to see integrated demographics and socioeconomic status and things going all places. Sometimes you'll see, and I put actually in the Facebook, in the comment section, I actually put a link to the first bill that Ida is talking about, 998. And then followed by that, I actually put the first committee that it goes to. So, and I know you guys have this in your packets before everybody comes up, but if Ida and I are thinking about a bill and she wants to do something in the House with her sister and I want to do something in the Senate, and that they start out pretty much identical and they have to end up being the same in the end as well. But they have to go through each committee. And if we're talking about housing, it's going to go through community affairs and maybe finance and tax and so on and so forth. The subject matter, whatever. And as we race through those committees, a lot of times people take pieces out and parts out based on their personal professional experience. That they take the legislator hat off and like, oh, I'm a doctor, I know all about that, and pull it out, or change things. And then sometimes you're going to see that bills that we were completely against, we might have voted yes at one stop. And actually on 998, I voted yes in community affairs. And you're like, oh, why? And this is the reason why I put the link to the actual meeting, because you'll see that I'll be like, you know what? I know you need my vote to get to the next committee. And I will say yes, if you are willing to take that section out and put this section in. Really up there were 40 senators bartering, compromising, negotiating, fighting, whatever the adjective or the adverb is for that day, to be selfish for our districts. And this is the one part, I think I have good core democratic values, but this is the one part of me that's actually a fan of smaller government. And what I mean by that is by the time we make a decision, it's touched so many bureaucratic levels to get down back to the actual person we're trying to help on the street in the community that we're trying to help, that it's been touched, it's been expended, it's been diluted, it's been changed, it's been, you know, so on and so forth. And it's not exactly what the intent was up here. And this is the one part that I'm sort of a fan of taking, not the local, but the express lane to get back to the people that we're trying to help. One part of that bill spoke to being able to build in areas that are otherwise zoned for something else. What do I mean by that? To be able to build residential in something that was once a junkyard. Well, you know what? In the parts of my district, a lot of dilapidated areas of blight or sections are where it was easy to put a gas station, a junkyard, a collection area, some kind of business, big neon signs, pawn shops, whatever. And you know what? If somebody wants to come in and do like a 80-20 split between market and affordable housing, I'm good with that. They're going to serve really three purposes. One, they're going to improve to a higher and better use of what their property is being used for. They're going to clean up the environmental because they're going to be required to come up to what the current specs are. And they're going to, revive a certain area. So I'm not completely opposed to it. But there's other little parts that Ida was speaking about that touch on special interest, and you can see people's hands and fingerprints and different industries' fingerprints sometimes on a lot of these bills that seem not to have a nexus between the first line and the second line. So
The funny thing in the legislative process is that there is a process. You have to have the House bill, the Senate bill, they have their respective committees, they have to go through their committees. But if you're in charge of your leadership, you can literally drop a bill with an hour's notice, if even, and that thing will pass. So it's this really funny piece, but it is an uphill effort for folks like us, for community right now. Our goal is to get more Rep. Josephs and Senator Pizzo, more champions, right? But you to Senator Pizzo's point, you have to understand the process. And absolutely, the way a bill starts is very rarely how it ends. And that can oftentimes be used to our advantage.
This is super great. I think I need to cast you two for Schoolhouse Rock, Florida version. Because
I'm down.
We'll come up with that. Azeve has some ideas. I think she sent me some music videos that were kind of similar. So
I can't. I'll do it, but it'll be horrifying. So on healthcare access, so critical, and healthcare, similar to housing, similar to a lot of sort of the issue buckets we work in. So organizational coalitions sort of around all these issues, and we have like weekly meetings throughout session where every single partner that represents people impacted by these issues. We have weekly calls where we sort of debrief over what is going on, what happened in Tallahassee this week, and what can we prepare for next week, and who do we have to talk to, and who's mobilizing where. The work that Chara really anchors around aligning everybody around the calendar, things like that. We do very similar work, on issues, including on healthcare. And so in no, small part to that, we had a few more successes in healthcare. Healthcare is very complicated, like everything else. And the former, well, technically he's still speaker, but he's termed out, but Speaker Jose Oliva from Miami Lakes, healthcare was one of his big sort of lifelong priority. His goal was to sort of dismantle what he calls the healthcare industrial complex. And I'm sorry, my internet was skipping again, so hopefully it's okay. But he's championed a lot of the healthcare reform stuff, that a lot of it we would see causing harm to our communities. Some are actually bipartisan and fair proposals that actually will help. But other things we steadfastly object to. And other things that we support, leadership are steadfast objected to. So an example around that is expanding Medicaid, right? We've been fighting for years under the Affordable Care Act to expand the eligibility of who can access Medicaid in Florida. And those bills did not pass this session. We continue to fight. We know that Medicaid access is a popular issue among Floridians. This is something where the legislature continues to put partisanship over people. They continue to essentially be what it feels like sometimes 10 to 20 years behind where Florida are. I joke that's because, the capital is in this remote place in North Florida, right? And it's just a very different from the state. And so in the legislature and our state lawmakers, the majority are not aligned with the struggle that everyday people face, particularly Black and brown and immigrant folks, right? And so these bills did not pass, but we continue to fight. We were able to stop Medicaid work requirements. And actually, so the bill this session was actually even more broad than the bill in the 2019 session. It impacted as well as Medicaid access and requiring search requirements for Medicaid, things like that. It also included new stricter requirements for TANF. That bill did not even move in the Senate. It did get a couple hearings in the House, but never made it to the full House floor. And part of that, I believe, is because of the work that we did last session to put up a massive fight around what was then House Bill 1, which was in the state House. If it's a single-digit bill, that indicates it's a priority of leadership. So House Bill 1 through 9, but that tells us that's a speaker, right? And so we were able to defeat that bill in the 2019. And so this session, it actually had even less momentum than the 2019 session, which for us tells us that we are doing a damn good job fighting and representing people impact and demonstrating that Floridians oppose, these sort of draconian and, just morally wrong piece of legislation that make health as restrictive and based on, frankly, lies. Right? This idea that poor people are poor because we deserve it or because we're not working hard enough, and we know, like, our community is the hardest working people, right? And so we're continuing to dismantle that and demonstrate to elected officials that there's consequences, right? And I appreciate this question around how do these lawmakers continue to get reelected when they support wholly cruel and unpopular legislation. Understanding is free space, but I will, note that there does need to be, regardless of your party, any of that, we need to demonstrate that when you support the West, when you support immigrants, when you support criminal justice reform, you win, right? There needs, lawmakers need to understand that there's consequences to their actions. And so often they're serving, a special interest that's getting them reelected through donations and things like that. And they don't think they have to answer to community, right? And so we have to, get involved, lobbying the Capitol stories, make sure that you are front and center and that you're, particularly as constituents, that your lawmakers know that you're watching and you vote and these are issues you care about, right? And then another bill that Senator Pizzo, another amazing champion, on HIV decriminalization. This bill, I'm going to hand it to Senator Pizzo to give some of the deets on this bill, but we actually did secure, bipartisan support, a hearing in the House, which is a big deal, of course, in the Senate. Senator Pizzo can speak to it, but the bill ultimately did not pass. But Senator Pizzo, would you like to talk about anything else on the healthcare front?
I mean, that particular bill really had two major components. At long last, to be able to allow HIV positive patients to donate and provide organs to other HIV positive recipients, which is kind of a no-brainer. The other issue is the decriminalizing and leading to the destigmatization of HIV. Right now, you couple every sexually transmitted disease into a misdemeanor, gonorrhea, chlamydia, all the things you learned in health class. But HIV is still in the vestiges of the 1980s and misinformation and lack of information, still stuck really in a bygone era. It promotes really bad things. It incentivizes people not to be tested, not to be treated, because it has a knowledge requirement. And I think we're going to make a little bit more headway. Again, I'm going to go back to what we said at the beginning about receptivity, I think, in people's appetite for a lot of change and really prioritizing what's not that important anymore to people. Like, don't take yourself too seriously is the first and last thing my dad and my brother told me when they found out that I got elected. Like, just don't take yourself to just, do what you got to do. But sometimes, we're talking about the machinations and all this and the serpentine fashion and then this and that. Sometimes you just got to come straight ahead and you just got to demand and insist that that's what's going to happen. And Ida remembers last session, when we're talking about the hygiene bill, basic hygiene products for women in a facility, I never changed my bill. Like, from the first going to the last. And I had to make the argument of staring in people's eyes and say, you know what, I was a prosecutor. I put many of these women, I prosecute a lot of these women. And part of the social contract is the decency to believe that they can be rehabilitated, not just forever and forgotten. And if you expect them to be rehabilitated and be returning citizens and come back into society and be law abiding and all that, we got to treat them like human beings. Now, on the House side, candidly, it got just picked apart. And by the time it got to the end, there was nothing left. And there was like a little bit of like, you know, enthusiasm and celebration, like, oh, the bill that we've been following since last year is going to pass in the House. Yeah, but the bill was crap and it had nothing in it. It had nothing. It had like, oh, an advisory committee to decide what's necessary for women. Let women decide what's necessary for women. So I didn't change my bill. And at the very last minute, when Representative Jones, now Senate-elect Jones, Kim was like, hey, listen, I can get my bill passed. What do you want to do? Do you want to change yours to mine? I'm like, no, go back and tell the House Speaker that he's going to put my bill version on, or I'm going to buy tampons for every single woman in the state of Florida in prison. And then I'm going to take out full page ads in newspapers to say he couldn't provide tampons for women. And Sharon's like, you really want? I go, like, yeah, I really want you to say that. Sure enough, he went back, he said it, and our version passed. And sometimes you just got to stick with it. And sometimes you just got to hit people personally and individually. So if there's something that people that are watching are passionate about, some of the greatest ideas we got were from 16-year-olds thinking I would never read their email, okay? And we do. And I have one little anecdotal story, if I can. Can I have 30 seconds?
Of course.
Ida Eskamani did not know me that well, and she didn't know from where I came. She didn't know that for 12 weeks, Zelalem was my teacher at the Clear Institute and for Catalyst, learning about environmental justice and climate change. And so there was one particular bill that was very contentious that all of you know about. It was SB 168, and it had to do with basically with ICE and deportation and all that stuff. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this isn't hyperbole, I think the Democrats filed, we as a caucus filed maybe 50 amendments. And
there was a total in both chamber 250 in Senator.
So just to be clear, the Republicans, Joe Gruters in the Senate, I forgot who did it in the House, but filed a bill as it relates to undocumented immigrants. And collectively, I'll take Ida's word for it, there were 250 amendments that Democrats were seeking to change or piece apart. I filed one as well. So I was one of the 250. Every single one of those amendments failed. Every single one of them. If I know in the Senate, I can't speak to the House, but I know every single amendment in the Senate failed, except for one, mine. And it was pretty encompassing, and it was pretty broad and had a lot of teeth to it. And what it said was victims and witnesses of violent crimes cannot be deported. And that was like a huge deal. That meant that young Haitian Americans, a 15-year-old girl who's just gotten here, who's been raped, shall not be held under and afraid to report something, or robbed, or something taken. And that was really important. But what I did was, to sell it, was look in the eyes of my colleagues and say that their daughter could be raped, or their husband could be killed, and it might be an undocumented alien standing on the corner who's an essential witness. And it resonated. And the reason why I bring it up as a joke is because, like, Ida and a couple other people asked me after that amendment passed, it was passed unanimously, if I was cutting deals with the Republicans. Sometimes it's just the argument and the way that you make it, and being insistent on not bending and showing that you're reasonable but inflexible when it comes to doing the right thing. And as it relates to healthcare, we've been urging the Surgeon General to pull down $70 million that's available. They just got $11 million a couple of weeks ago for HIV treatment and prevention and things like that. So it's just doing the right thing. It's not partisan.
I appreciate that story, Senator, and you are.
You remember that? You're like, you're cutting deals with the Republicans. I'm like, what deals?
I don't recall exactly.
No, you said deals.
Accusing you of that, but I do remember everybody convinced you did, because the only way a Democrat could pass an amendment was to cut a deal. And that's when I realized that Senator Pizzo did not know you well, but I did realize you were a different breed, and I was very grateful for that. And I do love that story. And folks, just so you know, my internet cut out, but I'm on my phone now, so all is well. But I appreciate that story deeply, Senator. And like I said, there's a unique breed of folks that can get things done while still holding on to our values. And you are correct. Out of all those amendments, there was one that accidentally passed that was ultimately repealed, but yours was the one that leadership adopted. And certainly with a bill that causes a lot of harm, at least we know in that moment for victims of crime, there were a bit more protections, which we're very grateful for. On healthcare, so really briefly, before we go to the next, to climate action, I just want to note, the abortion access was under attack again this session, particularly access for minors. The forced parental consent bill passed And we're seeing the harm right now as essentially minors have to go to a judge to access an abortion, and judges are rejecting them or their paperwork is not updated. And we're seeing vulnerable youth having to go through this process, which there were already quite a lot of restrictions in Florida law around minors accessing abortion without parental consent. And typically in these cases, it's because it would cause them harm to ask for parental consent. So we're just, that's a massive loss this session, a big, causes a lot of harm to folks, but it was incredible to see so many, particularly young people and young Black and brown women come up to the Capitol to share their stories and demand abortion access, and we'll keep building along that as well. But we also were able to defeat a cap on THC and medical cannabis. We defeated the transgender youth medical ban this session. So just a lot of victories in healthcare as well, but also some losses, and we'll continue to fight. All right, on climate. So this was the first legislative session ever where Republicans started to say climate change, which is a pretty big deal, and we'll take it, right? Unfortunately, it was a lot of talk over action. Again, you know, you could argue, you know, if you're optimistic, it's a good signs, but of course we're long overdue for climate action. And so many of our bills also sit on the intersections of climate, right? So Senator Pizzo's bill around an automatic moratorium on evictions during hurricanes. I mean, that is lined up exactly with climate action as well, and frontline communities. The bill here around defending outdoor workers from extreme heat, right? This is a workers' rights issue. It's an immigrant rights issue. It's a repro issue, because we know pregnant workers in particular who work outside face extreme disparities in their births, right? And then we also, of course, it's directly a climate issue. And so much of climate justice sits on so many intersections of our work. And so to speak to some of these bills here, a bill to help Floridians with home improvements for septic and sea level rise repairs. That bill did not pass. The bill for heat stress for outdoor workers, it did not pass. However, we are really proud to say we secured some bipartisan support behind this bill, and these fights are not going anywhere. We're going to continue to advocate. And then the bill that did pass, Senator Rodriguez, JJR, as we lovingly know him in Miami-Dade, as well as Republican Representative Vanessa Lupus, they championed and passed the first ever climate bill to pass the Florida legislature, a bill that essentially requires that any future infrastructure that takes the invulnerable areas to sea level rise that uses public funds has to go through certain requirements and an analysis to make sure that it's going to be safe to build there, right? And so this is really the first ever kind of climate resiliency bill ever passed in the legislature. It was done so in the bipartisan fashion with folks from the Miami-Dade delegation, and a huge victory when it comes to climate action. And you know, we have so much work to do. Senator Rodriguez and my twin sister, Representative Eskamani, filed a bill to require Florida to be 100% sustainable by 2050, right? 100% sustainable energy by 2050. Of course, Senator Pizzo's bill on eviction moratoriums during state of emergencies, which we know is no longer just a hurricane issue. We also have to be prepared for pandemics, right? You know, all these bills, the heat stress bill for outdoor workers. These are issues that are not going anywhere, sadly. We have to address climate. That is a current crisis, whether it's, you know, making headlines or not. And so we'll keep up that fight, and really grateful for the work that, all the work that Catalyst does in this front as well. So some victories, certainly, you know, we're in a position to mitigate harm and to reduce harm now that leadership, the majority party, are finally saying climate change. That is a good sign, but we certainly need and demand more action on this. And living wages. So I believe Senator Rodriguez, I can't remember the House sponsor, forgive me, but we did file a bill to increase Florida's minimum wage. I believe this bill is a $15 minimum wage bill, but it would do it so incrementally. This bill did not pass. Now voters will have a chance on their ballot this year to raise the minimum wage. So certainly recommend my unsolicited endorsement is to vote yes on that. And I think I might be frozen again. Let me know if I am. Oh no, I don't think I am. Cool. Well, that's that bill we'll continue to hear it, but I do want to note some other victories in the sense of workers and living wages, things of that nature. And so we also did file a bill that would essentially repeal the earned sick time and minimum wage preemption from statute to allow local governments to decide if they want to implement a local earned sick time ordinance. That bill did not pass. We're going to continue to fight for local control when it can help address equity in our communities. We also were able to stop the House Bill 1 this session, which was a big union busting bill. Huge shout out to the Working Families Lobby Corps of AFL-CIO, who comes up every single week to fight for working people. And we're continuing to do work around, addressing corporate giveaways and making sure that our tax system is fair and equitable to all, right? And making sure that when there are tax incentives, that they have a return on investment, and that they are creating more jobs and creating job security in Florida. And Representative Joseph is not here, but I did want to give her a huge shout out. During the 2019 session, she was able, of course, with directly impacted people championing alongside her, passed legislation that would include unemployment benefits for those who are victims of domestic violence. This is a huge win. It's quite frankly disgusting that this is even something we had to pass, that this was removed in our unemployment statute, but to include that during the 2019 session is a huge victory. And I hope a sign that we can continue to gain momentum in revamping Florida's unemployment system, which we know has been a complete and utter disaster by design that is leading to infinite suffering in our communities. It's why Senator Pizzo is in Tallahassee right now, dealing with the Department of Economic Opportunity and trying to get not just his constituents, the folks across the state, their unemployment benefits. And so huge shout out to Representative Joseph as a Democrat, as an incredible Black woman leading this. Huge win and a sign that we can certainly get a lot done together in the legislative process in Florida.
Thank you, Ida, so much. I'm going to pass it to Senator Pizzo now to talk about anything you want, especially the 2021 legislative session. I imagine COVID is on a lot of people's minds too, but I think we're wondering what to expect. It's just been such a huge question mark. And then what we'll do, we'll pass it to Q&A.
I'm doing a little Schoolhouse Rock during the commercial break here, but because I'm just a bill. No, let me say this. There's no victory or value other than it feels good to have filed and worked on a number of things that it's bittersweet because it comes and it's born out of tragedy that they become relevant. And what do I mean by that? There's been some mention. Last year, I filed a bill that during a state of emergency, you can't be evicted. Well, look where we are. Last year, I filed a bill to require implicit bias training for law enforcement officers. And I got a bunch of sort of tone deaf looks of, is it really necessary? Well, look where we are. So listen, it's not to call out, people on the other side of the aisle that what'd you do on May 24th, the day before George Floyd was killed, and did you care then? But it is about, listen, this is why we say these things. And I think I'm looking forward to next session. I think it's going to be lean. There's not going to be a lot of money around. It is going to be policy and argument, based, which I like. I like trial. I like, argument. I like, getting into that. And it's really we're all going to get a bit naked about our feelings and about our situations, because this disaster has been fairly ecumenical. I have an equal number of angry, upset, suffering, nearly homeless, food security, housing insecurity, car loan missing payment, no money for medicine Republicans as I do Democrats. And for a lot of them who have basically looked at the poor or those who need help and need an uplifting, they're going to quickly learn the difference between equality and equity. Okay, they're going to get a quick, sharp learning curve education. And those things that I think people were really arguing and screaming about, or to the far left or to the far right, I think we're going to get a lot done. And I think we can redefine what the center is. I think we can really redefine that now we have what were middle class, comfortable families in January are now suffering and desperate. And I just hope people don't have short-term memories when it comes to affecting that type of change. I think at the state level, we're going to get rid of rhetoric. We'll have whoever wins November 3rd, that'll be over. And no other side should pound their chest, and we should just get back to remembering where we all were and how we all felt like in the throes of this crisis. The other thing too is there's going to be a lot of changes, a lot of things that are going to come out. There's been a lot of speculation about who was responsible for what and all that stuff. I have a pretty good idea. I have copious notes. I've had several conversations with those who would like to talk publicly about what they did and didn't do years past. So you're going to see a lot of like gotcha moments, a lot of sort of hearing probably in a select committee that's going to come out, and you're going to hear the truth about a lot of stuff. But keep reaching out to us, please. Like, don't be shy. I joked today to an organization that's actually in my district. This is a true story. And Zalal, you know this. You guys call, I do whatever I possibly can. I mean, we've done barbecues and stuff, and I love to come and speak at the Oral Health Summit. I asked you guys, but there's a really important organization that's right in my district that's 25 blocks from my house. And they've never called me in 2 years. They've never reached out to me. They like the bills that we passed, but they've never called me. And like finally today, someone from the organization called because they need help with their driver's license renewal, and I can get them an appointment within 24 hours. And I can get anybody else too, so just reach out to me. But that's the first time I've heard from that organization. And I just want to be clear about something, okay? And this is not easy to say, but it's the truth. It's not necessarily popular sometimes that the white guy from New Jersey is the one getting things done a lot. It's just not. It doesn't fit a lot of narratives sometimes. I'm not black or brown. I didn't grow up in Miami. But my family's story from very early is not one of, absolute and crazy wealth, from the beginning. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of luck, and a lot of good people and support networks along the way. But I don't take any BS. And the one thing that I do have to say, and this is important, it's the kind of people that we have on here as well. What I care about and what I'm concerned about is, and what's the right thing to do, I'm not flexible and I'm not able to be influenced or pushed to a side, left or right. What's right and just to be done, needs to get done. So don't be shy. Like, I just did a quick little thing on mute while we were on here because there's a 14-year-old boy who doesn't believe that I just texted his mother on Facebook, happy birthday. Okay, we shouldn't be that inaccessible. So I called her on Facebook on Messenger and just called the kid out and said, hi, I'm your state senator and I'm wishing your mother Laura a happy birthday. Okay, reach out to us. We can get things done, but we need help, we need ideas, we need support. And we're only as strong and as influential as how much enthusiasm and support and advocacy that we get from great organizations like Catalyst, which is why I like to support you guys every day.
Thank you, Senator Pizzo. So now I'm sure we have a lot of questions, so I'll pass it on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can have easier access to look at what people are writing and facilitate a little bit. And then after the Q&A, when we've exhausted our questions, I'll pop back in and just say a few words about our trip for the upcoming, for 2021. So with that, if someone on the line has a question, you can unmute yourself or maybe one of the staff can read out the chat and I'll be joining shortly. I can't see the chat when I share my screen.
Sure. I have one specifically from that somebody sent me. Is there a deadline that the Senate or House have in order to make changes to a part of a bill that has been laid on the table?
I can just easily take this. It really is just squeezing in the amount of time before the director, so to speak, of the floor in the Senate, the rules chair. What do I mean by that? You have to get it in within the window of the deadline. So our bill on the shackling and the solitary confinement of women was changed a number of times back and forth. The cutoff was really midnight at the end, was going to be the end of session. And I think it was 11:38 p.m. when the last change came back from the House having been voted on, and I got it heard on the Senate floor literally with 22 minutes remaining in the session. So the last possible thing is when it goes back and forth. People making changes sometimes kills the bill, and sometimes that's on purpose. A lot of times it's on purpose.
I echo what the senator said, and when a bill is laid on the table, that per the definition, what that typically means is that that bill is sort of being given up. It's being laid on the table. It's not going to get picked up again, typically, but because they're going to adopt the other version, right? So let's say the House bill and the Senate bill are now slightly different, and the House and the Senate are now negotiating. They may lay one on the table, meaning they're going to put that one away because they're going to adopt the other one. But there's a whole bunch of sort of, like in every field, right? If I was talking to a doctor, I wouldn't know what they were saying because they're speaking their own language, right? The legislature is very similar. So when you learn these terms and know the rules, you can kind of use them to your advantage more, right? But that for lay on the table, typically you can't edit it anymore. But to Senator Pizzo's point, there's so much bartering happening really from day one to the end. And again, we've seen so many examples of bills that have literally appeared from thin air in the middle of session because a committee can file and put a bill forth at any time. Whereas, with traditionally there are deadlines to file a bill, to amend bills, to get those done. There's limits on how many bills a House lawmaker can file versus a senator. But again, when you're in charge, and you write the rules, they're often used to your advantage in the legislative process. And so, and there's moments where perhaps, sometimes when we're fighting things, sometimes time is our best ally. And yes, to Senator Pizzo's point, sometimes amendments are our best allies. If we can get a bill to be really different from its counterpart in the other chamber, sometimes, time runs out. And at this point, there's no way to make them the same. And the two chambers just can't agree and the bill dies, right? And in the bill around incarcerated women, that almost led us to the bill failing. I mean, and huge kudos to Senator Pizzo and his staff. Maggie totally did an incredible job, as well as several House members who carried that bill in the House in the last day, and directly impacted people.
Because the bill sponsors went home. Z, we have a couple questions in here. Who is this Badili Jones person? Does anybody know who that is?
I don't know, but they're on. You can unmute yourself if you want.
Who's Badili Jones? Okay. I'm joking. I know exactly who it is.
Oh.
So,
I'm here. Can you hear me?
yes.
I was on mute, actually, and I'm kind of sitting here kind of casually in a backyard court right now, so I don't want to get on a speaker right now. I'm too casual.
All right. We'll tell everybody how I know you a different time. Okay. So currently ask what's currently happening with unemployment. So if people, you got to reach out to us because Rep Eskamani, Ida's sister, is on this as well. We're sort of consolidating everything into like final lists of like just objective, comprehensive lists to give to DEO and then sort of forcing the issue. But what's going on right now is you've heard obviously that there's state unemployment and there's federal. There has been no federal. It expired at the end of July. And the president took the extraordinary measure of, by executive order, authorizing that FEMA money be used basically to give an extension. The original plan called for the state to chip in $100 for every 300, and then repealed that because some states can afford it. But it would also require sort of tapping into the CARES Act money. $44 billion was distributed nationwide. 5 and change came to Florida, and that's already been sort of committed to counties and to cities. And so we had to find another source. And they're like, well, let's not reinvent the wheel. What did we do before? Oh, Rick Scott borrowed money from the Department of Labor back during the Great Recession. And how did he pay it back? Well, he was supposed to pay it back by asking employers for more money and bringing in more money, but instead paying so little out, and the pace of money coming in from employers was enough to repay the loan. Hopefully we don't get ourselves in that same situation, but we should hear something this week. From the governor about what the plan is. 2 states have already started sending money out. And another question about, do we need to audit and revamp the DEO? Stay tuned. It's going to be an exciting session. You're going to hear me asking a number of pointed questions to some pretty interesting witnesses, and it's going to be like a trial. Point of privilege. I see Jackie X here. How's Princess? How's your daughter? How's she doing?
She's doing good. Thursday's her birthday.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Will you send me a text and remind me?
I will.
We'll do something wacky and send something over to you. Okay. What else? What other questions do we have?
I saw one quick question. Oh, I'm sorry, Islam. I saw a question around just you know, folks were citing how Democrats and Republicans, like, why are Republicans so heartless? And someone made a good point that I think is important to amplify, is that unfortunately, heartlessness is certainly bipartisan, or maybe nonpartisan. There's certainly a lot of Democrats that don't do right by our people either.
Absolutely.
And so I just wanted to center that. And there's some Republicans that actually are amazing champions.
I ran against a couple. Yeah.
You sure did. So I just, you know, it's certainly not a partisan thing. I think it's really important to look at people's platform, their voting records, their donors, and see who they're beholden to. Not, you know, and you'll see some really, you know, problematic ties there sometimes. But it's, you know, it's so important just to as constituents, your first priority number one. You should be priority number one for your lawmaker, and if you're not, that's a problem, right? And you know, there's ways to figure out who is their priority, and so so just wanted to center that.
Ask candidates, people asking for your support. Just start with the basics. Ask them about how they feel about the golden rule. Like, just establish that as a baseline. Do you want me to treat you the way that, you know, that I want to be treated? And then from there. But every once in a while, you got to have some fun during session, and people that come up know this. Well, I think we have like 25 to 30 appointments booked in one day, and they go like in 15 minutes. And Maggie and my staff hate me by the end of the week because I give everybody extra time as long as they need, and I don't mind staying. You know, I'm a captive audience. But you know, I was raised Roman Catholic. I have an Irish mother and Italian father, and I went to Catholic school for 5 years. So when the Catholic nuns come up to, you know, to have a meeting in my office, I'm like, yeah, listen, you know, have at it. You know, the room is nice. Everybody sits down, and they're talking to me about the sanctity of life, okay, and how important life is. And I, you know, and I'm someone that believes in a woman's right to choose, which they consider that to be not appreciative of the sanctity of life. So listen, we'll disagree on that, right? But we should be able to house people and feed people and educate people and give them healthcare and all that stuff. You know, the ones that are here, right? But they're pressing, and they probably looked me up, and I think my family up in New Jersey's, you know, very generous to the Catholic Church. So they probably like, oh, go talk to him. So I'm like, listen, I'll make everybody a deal. I'll make you a deal. Leave my office right now, okay? And because they were like on the parental consent bill, on giving parental consent, you know, for young women. I said, if you leave my office right now, if you can get the Republican majority in the House and the Senate, it shouldn't take you too long. If you can get the Republican House and the Senate majority to agree for universal health care and complete Medicaid expansion, I will support that bill. And they stood up in earnest, and I guess I didn't seem like I was being sarcastic. They're like, are you sure? Do you really mean that? I said, absolutely, absolutely. If you can get health care for everyone in Florida, because life is so important, and health and welfare is so important, if you can get that, you have my support for parental notification, for parental consent. I felt bad that they still, and it's the truth. Like, okay, if life is that important, if you're going to quote scripture on the floor, you know, I know two things. I think there's a God, and I'm not him. So, you know, if you're going to quote it and you're going to believe it and espouse these virtues and these ideas and these principles, well, then see it all the way through and complete the circle. Surely you don't want people to suffer, and you want them to have a home and something to eat, and not, you know, I don't know. I digress.
Definitely. We have one question from Gabby Espinosa. And I will jump in, I will add to this, Gabby, but I wanted to put it up to our panelists. What's the best way to stay informed on bills important to our community? Or any advice generally for becoming an engaged community leader?
This is on Facebook. So the first thing that I gave was a link to the Florida Senate site, and you can do this on the House as well. It's called Bill Tracker. And there's also a really cool keyword search function. So things that are important to you, like if, I don't know, basketball is important, you to put in basketball. If abortion is an issue, or, you know, however the keyword is, put it in the keyword search, it'll come up. And this is important, not just a snapshot of what's current this year or filed or to be heard, but other years. And you can see sort of the incremental or wild, you know, progression or regression, so to speak, of a number of bills. But it's called Bill Tracker. It's like a yellow circle, and it will notify you. My mom does it every session. She puts in all of my bill numbers, and then when it's coming up for a meeting, she gets a notice that, hey, SB 970, whatever, is coming up. So you should do that. And it's important to watch these committee meetings. I gave the second link. That's the one that I put for community affairs. You can watch the video, watch the arguments. A lot of legislators come home and tell you what they did and how hard they fought for you and all that stuff. And then you go back on the video and you're like, dude, you were on your phone the whole time. You didn't say a word. What are you talking about? You didn't fight for justice. You didn't demand equality. You were like literally on your phone. You actually got up and left and like came back 5 minutes before the meeting ended. Watch the videos, watch the arguments. It's coming out right now. You know, Biscayne Bay, and everyone's like, Biscayne Bay is dying and all that stuff, right? I just posted on Facebook and social media, like last year, me having the conversation that nobody wanted to have about ripping up and replacing sewers and sanitary sewers and converting from septic tanks and treating the bay correctly and nutrient levels, all that. It was really unpopular and not sexy to campaign on, so nobody's been talking about it. But now when you have, you know, hundreds of millions of dead fish and algal blooms and people are getting sick, now it's current.
Wonderful. And I'll talk about how we can move forward at Catalyst, but I wanted to know before we do that, does anyone else have any questions they want answered? Oh, Raisa, you can unmute yourself. I can ask you. There you go.
Hi. So yeah, thank you everyone for putting this together. I have a question and I feel like I should probably wait until after November to ask it, but I'm gonna ask anyway. So it's regarding Senate Bill 1520, which would restore local government's power to set worker wages and protections. So like the earned paid sick time. And so my question is, do you think that the pandemic, with its burden on both health and, you know, of course, health and the economic well-being of households, and the need for paid sick leave for workers to not feel forced to show up at work sick, could it make it potentially more possible for a version of that bill to pass next session?
I love that question, and Senator Pizzo may have some thoughts too. But the short answer is, I do think there's some opportunities next session. That bill, we will see that bill again. And what we have seen throughout this pandemic is the media sort of referring back to bills that were filed that would make this pandemic more humane, more bearable, that were never heard, that were always ignored. And the list goes on and on. Senator Pizzo's bill around eviction moratoriums during state of emergencies, the earned sick time preemption repealer. The list goes on and on and on of all of these bills that if they were passed, it would have made this moment much more better. And it sucks because—
More better? What?
But the thing is, you know, they think we were—
6 points for grammar. Sorry. Go ahead. I'm just
kidding.
kidding.
I always tell people, Senator, I learned English from folks who it was not their first language, and it comes out a lot.
My fourth language. I speak New Jersey, South Jersey. Yeah.
I do have a master's degree, if anyone was wondering, but the point is, so many of these things, folks, sometimes it feels like our opposition thinks we're crying wolf or making up problems because they don't know them themselves, right? And they apparently refuse to acknowledge these things exist, or perhaps their donors are telling them they don't exist and they're just pretending to ignore things. But what we often see is that, you know, in this moment during COVID, all the proposals that community has put forth, you know, it proves that community knows best. And we've been constantly ignored, right? And we've had some victories, right? And we keep fighting, but community knows what we need. We have to send to directly impacted people. And if we were in charge, it'd be a much more equitable, fair, more beautiful world. And we're gonna keep fighting to do that, right? But so I do think there's momentum. The one thing I'll say, and then Senator, I know you have thoughts too, is, you know, we have to watch out. Corporate liability, and I mean like unilateral, just absurd corporate liability is something we're seeing in the federal level, and there's conversations in the state level. And my sort of rule is corporations should not have complete immunity to COVID cases if they don't provide an infinite earned sick time, right? Like, so, you know, we're gonna see a lot of moments here next session because while we know what we need, I'll tell you what, some of those powerful special interests in Florida, they have a long list of things they want too, right? And so we have to be prepared for that. And so we hope there's momentum. I hope, Senator Pizzo, what you said at the top of this, of sort of this, you know, I thought it was a wonderfully optimistic vision. I hope it's true, where folks will put partisanship aside and just put up good ideas, right? And I do think I know that the people of Florida are demanding these things in a way that they never once were before. So I'm hopeful we can get some momentum behind, you know, something as basic as repealing the preemption earned sick time, which again, doesn't mean earned sick time, it just allows local governments and community to implement it. So I'm hoping we have momentum behind that and a lot of other issues that we've seen as well. And it's a great question, I appreciate it. And I'll stop yapping now.
Thank you.
So last night, the second person to speak on a delegate nomination was State Senator Joe Gruters from the Republican Party. He is the Republican Party of Florida chair, Senator Joe Gruters, and he sits right in front of me on the floor. He's a state senator from the West Coast. And when his mother, who is a cashier in a store, could not get her unemployment a few months ago, he cried bloody murder and said someone should be arrested for this. So I would expect that my good friend from the other side of the aisle, who just nominated, had the 122 delegate nomination for the President of the United States from the great state of Florida, had that honor and spoke of it last night to the national audience. I hope he'll remember that his mother had a very hard time getting her unemployment. Not because I wish for her to suffer because of her son's, delirious party affiliation, but because she's a Floridian and has owned that money. Now, what does that mean? The $275 max is $6.87 an hour. And I think people who are living well and not really that receptive or sensitive or finding any empathy whatsoever in these struggles will hopefully help us going forward in the session to remind their own legislators that $6.87 standing alone is not enough, especially, that we're not standing alone. Montana, which is not exactly a metropolitan, it doesn't really have Billings is not necessarily a skyscraper laden, kind of contemporary place. They pay $508 a week. So the average rent in Florida is $1,181. If I'm paying you $275 gross, no taxes taken out, and that's best case scenario, it's $1,100 a month in Florida. So you're making $81 less than the average rent is. In Billings, Montana, $2,032 a month ain't that bad. Okay, you can live on that without a federal kick-in. Florida cannot survive standing alone without federal assistance. And we do that because we've made it so cheap to do business in Florida. We've made it so cheap, we're finding out how expensive it is to be so cheap. We have given deferred maintenance to our own residents, to our own community. We have tapered off and rationed so much and made it so incredibly, incentivizing for people to do business here. It's so cheap that it being in a boom and bust state, when you bust, you have to beg and plead for help. That's it.
That's such a
You can
good
use that line.
quote,
Yes.
Senator. I love
Yeah,
that line.
we can save the video because that was good. Very, very true. We have a question. Can you speak to, the census, they moved their deadline up. We have about a month. It ends on September 30th. Why is the census so important?
So the federal government gave up, and I chime in, you can cut me off, it's fine. The federal government gave $44 billion out to states for CARES Act money, right? A storm comes and they calculate a certain amount of money. How do they come up with $6 billion and $8 billion and $12 billion and this for education and that for roads? And how do they know how much everything's going to cost? It's based on a head count, okay? And although Trump tried to do his darndest to insert little language and questions in there to ask you about where you were born and what your status is, he did not prevail. Common sense did. You're gonna find out in this process that common sense is not that common. But here we are, and everybody, regardless of where you're from, what your station, condition, situation, status, whatever, be counted, because the dollars for literally for food and for roads and schools and medicine and tents, how much of a vaccine should we buy for that area is based on the census. You do not want you and your children waiting in bread lines because there's not enough. Hopefully come back tomorrow. If you don't want to be in the, I live in an odd numbered house, you live in an even, we'll do you Mondays, Wednesdays in front. No, be heard, be counted, step up. I did PSAs in Creole, giving out the number, just do it. It takes 9 minutes and be counted. Nobody's going to be deported for it. Nobody's going to be asked about it. The information is kept private. But if we're not counted, and folks, we live in an environment where growing up, the majority of people on this call knew their neighbors to the left and the right. And none of you today know everybody in your neighborhood. You just don't. That's just a reality of it, which is kind of ironic when we join these things talking about causes and concerns and humanity and our fellow man. And how many of you on this call could walk outside randomly to this building across the street and ask for sugar? None of you. Fill it out, be counted. That's how we get resources. That's how we get services.
Thank you, Senator Pizzo. I'm like a weird, strange creature that knows my neighbors very well, but
Of course you do, Zlatan. Of course you do.
I have sugar galore. I Actually, I have like cheese, wheels of cheese, because they're Italians. Anyways, they sent me wheels of cheese. I'm gonna share my screen. If someone wants to ask a question in the meantime, one last one. Otherwise, I'm gonna talk about how you can get involved as an advocate at Catalyst. So just give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, I'm back. I did it. All right. So we have an event. We go to advocate, like I shared in the beginning, in Tallahassee every year. It's called Catalyst to the Capitol. You can see the website here where you can find more information. That's catalystmiami.org/C2C. We have 3 levels of advocacy. The first is ambassadors. These applications are open now today on that website link. This is a mentorship role for former Catalyst to the Capitol or Days participants to really get deep in defining our policy strategy and legislative, the legislation we want to champion. They get involved in a lot of the coalitions that Ida mentioned, and they're paid $15 an hour. If you've been to Tallahassee before and you're really interested, I would just welcome you to go ahead and apply, even if you haven't been with us. But we're basically looking for these ambassadors to serve as mentors to fellows, which are the second category. Fellows are first-time participants. If you've never been to Tallahassee before, you get a free trip, if we can go in person, and we'll figure something out if not due to COVID on how we're going to advocate next year. But you'll get a free hotel, free food, free bus trip with all of us, all the way up to Tallahassee with just a refundable deposit. And then lastly, partners, those at organizations. We go up during Days in Tallahassee, which are the Miami-Dade County themed advocacy days. That's generally quite expensive to go up in a plane and pay for your own hotel and all of that. So we charge a $350 fee, which would be quite competitive to what you would pay otherwise going by yourself. And you can go with us. And we'd love to have some of your members come too as fellows or as ambassadors. So please encourage them to apply if you're interested. So that's my pitch. Let's see, this is my email. If you have any questions, it's also on that webpage, catalystmiami.org/C2C. And I'm happy to take any questions, but if you want to stay involved in Catalyst, here's our subscribe link, and we'd love to stay involved with you. All right, and for those that registered, I'll send some of the information that I just shared and probably the slides. Any last questions? I just want to give a huge thank you to Senator Pizzo, to Rep Joseph, to Ida Eskamani. You all are amazing. I learned so much. We're gonna do Schoolhouse Rock. I'm gonna put it together.
I just want to say, Zalam, and Senator Pizzo, when I found out that, Zalam, you were a teacher to Senator Pizzo, it filled my heart and answered so many questions, and I was just so grateful, and really it's humbling to be here with all of you.
Yeah, I'm so proud of my student. It feels weird to say. All right, well, thank you all so much.
I grew up, Mom. I grew up.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all that you do. Community members, elected officials, champions like Ida, we really appreciate it. And we hope to see you in Tallahassee with us.
Support Catalyst.
Thank you so much. All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.